the WGFestival 2021. I'm Joe Newmeyer, film critic for New York's WOR Radio, and I'm honored to introduce Aaron Sorkin, whose latest film, Being the Ricardos, is in theaters December 10th and on Amazon December 21st. The film telescopes several dramatic events in the lives and careers of Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz into 1 week in 1951. This compelling and terrific film is not a biopic, but instead a smart, swift, and very savvy exploration of how politics, media, power, and persona make strange but engrossing bedfellows, and how characters in crisis reveal the truth about their world and themselves. In other words, it's an Aaron Sorkin film. Aaron, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks a lot, Joe. It's good to be here.
Great to have you. Talk to us about the film and how the project came to you. I understand not only did you think you wouldn't direct it originally, but the project itself was not really something you originally thought you'd be able to tune into. Is that right?
Yeah. First of all, I've directed 3 movies now, the last 3 films that I've written, and I still haven't written a screenplay knowing I was going to be directing the movie. So it was a few years back when the producer, Todd Black, asked to meet me about Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. Todd had with him his then development executive, a woman named Jenna Block, who had written her college thesis paper on Lucille Ball. So they kind of just started pelting me with stories about them. And the first one to get my attention was that Lucy was accused of being a communist. And I remember after that first meeting, I just wanted to find out, am I the only one who didn't know that? Does everybody else know that? Or is this the best of all possible things? Even better than a story that nobody knows is a story that people think they know. And that's Lucy and Desi. It would take another year and a half, 2 years for me to commit to this. So over that time, Todd and his development executive, Jenna, and we met a number of times. I met with Lucy and Desi's daughter, Lucy Arnaz. And what I found was that there were just very interesting points of friction with them, very interesting conflicts. That's what I'm always looking for, are points of friction that turn into something. And so what I had were these 3 big events in their life. The accusation that Lucy was a communist, the fact that Desi showed up on the cover of Confidential magazine, a big tabloid back then, with another woman, and the headline, Desi's Wild Night Out, and then Lucille Ball being pregnant, which was a very big deal. It wasn't as easy then as it was now for a television star to be pregnant, and a character had never been pregnant on television. And as you said in your introduction, when you used the word telescope, I took those 3 events, and I put them in the same week. They didn't all happen in the same week, but for the purposes of this movie, why not put them in the same week? After all, as a writer, what you want to do is take a protagonist and then put as many boulders in front of them as you can, watch them try to overcome those obstacles. That's how it happened.
Yeah. And there's so many great things to talk about with that. Before we get into the specifics of it, I want to touch on that. You talk about a little bit more about how utilizing that artistic license and telescoping those events can sort of create this great crucible from which those revealing truths can emerge. Break down for us, if you can, what that process is like and the challenges and benefits of it, Aaron, because I feel like obviously there's the great sense of all of these things represent pieces of a whole, and kind of putting them into this burner, as it were, really kind of makes it boil in the best way, right?
That's right. I love claustrophobic spaces and claustrophobic periods of time. If something could take place in one room and in real time, over the 2 hours that it takes to do a movie, ideally that would be ideal. So that's where I got the idea to compress this all down to 1 production week of I Love Lucy. I didn't think that I was perverting history at all by having them happen in the same week. And that's really the litmus test that I use if I'm writing about real people. First of all, am I defaming them in any way? Am I saying that someone was a hit and run driver when they're not, or someone was a drug user when they're not? That's something I would never do. And second is, am I really perverting history? Am I getting people mixed up? And when you reach the decision that it's going to have no effect on anyone, saying that the Winchell story and the pregnancy and the confidential cover happened in the same week, you have the freedom to go ahead and do it. And it's important when you're writing nonfiction, when you're writing about real people, at some point, you have to leave journalism behind and start making this your own. Which is why the first thing that I would tell an actor or a prospective actor when it would be a Zoom meeting that we'd have, we did this all during COVID, was I am not looking for a physical or vocal impersonation of this character. Play the character in the script. Play the character in the script. Pretend it's fiction. Play the character in the script.
Now, yeah, in Being the Ricardos in particular, too, you set us into some fascinating places, which are engrossing. I should note and emphasize to anyone, whether they know the history of television, the importance of I Love Lucy, both in comedy and how comedy is made and presented to us and embraced by audiences. I want to ask, what was the research process like for the film, Aaron? What surprised you maybe during that process about that cultural moment, kind of even beyond the specifics? And because that was really one of the first, if not the first time, that there was that intense connection between audiences and the entertainment that they loved, right?
That's right. Research wasn't easy on this, because the first thing I was looking for was somebody who could tell me what a week at I Love Lucy was like. Before I got into what the movie was going to be about, just kind of the studs of the house. What does this look like? There's no one alive who can tell me anymore. Lucy Arnaz was a year and a half old when this movie takes place. So, I mean, I found a camera operator from I Love Lucy, and it was very nice to meet the gentleman, but it wasn't any help. There are a number of books written about Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. Most of them, with respect, aren't very good because they were written for I Love Lucy fans, and so you're not going to find any bad news in there at all. It's all going to be kind of like an episode of television in 1952, except for the autobiography that Desi wrote, which is simply called A Book by Desi Arnaz. First of all, he's a great storyteller, but also he doesn't mind giving you the bad news. It felt like with each chapter he'd had a couple of drinks before he started writing it, and there were things there that I really wanted to dramatize. And with me, I'm not a speedster by any means. It takes many months of pacing around and climbing the walls, but things start to come into focus. Again, those points of friction, like the fact that Desi comes from a culture that has a very narrow definition of manhood, and where manhood is very important. And he's kind of done all the manly things. He's done everything right to be a man. You just happened to fall in love with and marry someone who was always going to be, one car length ahead of him. He was the second banana to her, which became something that she needed to navigate. Going so far as to going to Jess Oppenheimer and saying, I need you to save my marriage. Can Desi have an EP credit? And Jess's response was, in fact, going to Desi and patronizing him and saying, you're really the title character of this because you're the I in I Love Lucy. The ego problem that Desi had was certainly a motivation for his philandering. A contradiction in Lucy, who had until I Love Lucy, listen, she was always a working actress. It was just, she was considered the queen of the B movies. What she would do, in her own words, is she would stick her head in a frame for a moment, say something bitchy, and then go away. So I noticed things like that. One of the things I noticed that really got me interested was that Lucille Ball doesn't look anything like Lucille Ball. In the same way that Charlie Chaplin doesn't look like Charlie Chaplin, right? When we think of Charlie Chaplin, we think of The Little Tramp. and that's not what Charlie Chaplin looks like. When you think of Lucille Ball, you're going to think of Lucy Ricardo, okay, which is not what Lucille Ball looks like. She's a knockout, and it's not what Lucy and Desi's marriage was like. Lucy also really yearned for domesticity. She wanted a home, dinner time, home, the family, the hearth, everything. And it was that last thing. Well, I just remember one day, I think I was driving in my car, and I just realized the irony of the most iconic line from I Love Lucy being Desi walking in the door and saying, "Lucy, I'm home." And I realized that where Lucy had successfully made a home was this little postage stamp size stage at RKO with Ricardo's living room. So suddenly there were things to write about, you know? It's not like I was ready to write Fade In, but I was at least getting closer to giving a firm commitment to Todd Black.
Yeah. I love that. Let's even delve into that a little bit more because, to pivot off even the entertainment aspect of I Love Lucy, and which you go into in the film in such perfect ways, Lucille Ball standing as CBS's cornerstone in 1951-52, the biggest asset in the portfolio of the Columbia Broadcasting System, as well as its sponsors, as she says. And the business aspect of Desilu, Lucy and Desi's production company, her inner comedic metronome that we see figuring out the artistry of the show's blocking and beats as she's reading bits to do or considering it. And Desi's technological innovations are all terrifically illuminating. In some ways, Aaron, from a writer's point of view, it must have felt like a giant well to draw from and kind of winnowing the wheat from the chaff, or maybe apropos of the show, I should say, a giant vat of grapes to stomp on. So from a writer's point of view, was it kind of a tricky thing, kind of figure out which grapes were the right ones and which ones to save?
Yes, it was, and what you had to make sure you didn't do was I Love Lucy. This can't just be a cover band doing I Love Lucy's greatest hits. That if you're coming to this movie to see the conveyor belt scene, just watch the conveyor belt episode of I Love Lucy. They're going to do it better. So yes, and what I was alluding to before, but never quite articulated, in terms of moving away from the journalism, you have to make it yours. And I think that I'm lucky in that I have never been an I Love Lucy superfan. I totally recognize her and his talent, and that it was ceiling breaking. It and by the way, had a lot to do with the quick success of this new technology television. But when word started getting out that I was going to be writing this, I heard from people who have an intense relationship with I Love Lucy, who really have this passionate connection to Lucy and Desi as a couple, to Lucy and Ethel as best friends, that this was sacred territory. And I feel like if I had gone into it feeling that, then I don't think I'd have been able to write what I wrote. It would have been more like those books that were not useful, that were written for I Love Lucy fans.
Yeah. That arm's length really benefited you in a lot of ways.
It does. And one more thing that freed me up was Lucy Arnaz, who after about 3 or 4 meetings at Todd Black's office, then came a lunch with Lucy Arnaz, who said to me, I can't remember the exact words, but it was some form of take the gloves off. My mother was not an easy woman. Go there. Okay. So that was awfully generous of her.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. And let's also, you mentioned Desi's the technological stuff, is that camera setup establishing that modern sitcom feel is obviously resonant, but there's so much more. Let's kind of drill down deep into some of the story points, because the reverberations between the film and things that are still relevant today is really astonishing. The issue of Ball's pregnancy and the network and sponsors being not just skittish, but domineering about it, obviously, in some ways, until Lucy and Desi push back, reflects a dismissal of women's realities that's still here in some ways. I'm sure any woman who's had to anchor a news show pregnant would attest to that, or actresses still having to deal with that. That plot point about gender politics is really still relevant and in different ways, softer ways, but still there in many ways, right, Aaron?
It is. And there are other discussions in the film about gender politics. The scene between Lucy and Madeline, where Madeline finally, brings up what she says is that for the sake of comedy, Lucy, meaning Lucy Ricardo, is often infantilized on the show. That the obstacle that she has to overcome is frequently her husband's permission. That maybe it's time to get out of the 1940s and into the 1950s, which was modern times for Madeline Pugh. The pregnancy was a big deal with CBS. They ultimately they allowed it to go on because the sponsor of the show, Philip Morris Tobacco, which is the biggest cigarette company in the country back then, said, "I'm going to use a different word than he actually uses in the film. Don't mess with the Cuban." So they did allow Lucy Ricardo to be pregnant. They didn't allow them to use the word pregnant. She had to say that she was expecting, and it was a very big deal when they pushed their two beds together on the bedroom set. Up until then, Lucy and Ricky slept in separate beds and in twin beds. In addition to all that, and this comes up because there's friction between Lucy and Vivian Vance. A woman couldn't be sexy on television then. If you had a pretty face, great, but they were going to do something even to with Lucille Ball, a Rita Hayworth level knockout. She's got the severe hairstyle. Everything is up to here. In stark contrast to Lucille Ball and Desi, who had an intense sexual relationship. So all these contrasts between the way it really was and what corporate America and television was kind of willing to show to the American people was very interesting to me. Yeah. Now, it was on Lucy's insistence that they maybe got away with the biggest taboo of all, which was a Cuban American on television married to the girl next door.
That's it. All of this in the film is so fascinating because it really kind of comes it feels it was 70 years ago, but it feels like yesterday in a lot of ways, and that sort of cultural climate of how America moves both slowly and quickly, depending on sort of which way you're looking at the clock, is so interesting. And similarly, the accusations that she faced of being a communist, such a touchstone, as we know, of the early 1950s. Mm-hmm. But what I love is that in Being the Ricardos, it is a stand-in for, to my eyes, in a lot of ways, how people's work can be impacted by forces they have no control over, or the tenor of the political moment, and the general push and pull of being an artist and needing to be aware of the climate your art exists in, right? I mean, that's sort of an interesting subtext to the film, as seen through that prism.
Last year with Chicago 7, in between writing it and the movie coming out, cities across America were erupting in riots. The protesters were being told that they were un-American. All these things were happening to make Chicago 7 more relevant than I ever wanted it to be. And then with Being the Ricardos, in which the biggest threat happening is this accusation of Lucy being a communist. And just to be clear, to anyone who hasn't seen the film, this doesn't exist in the abstract. They have a show to tape Friday. Walter Winchell breaks the news Sunday night. and there is every reason to believe they won't be doing a show Friday or ever again, or you're never going to hear from Lucille Ball or Desi Arnaz again. That would be the end of I Love Lucy. But what I was going to say was that, during this, we added to our vocabulary the words cancel culture, right? So the next time I write a screenplay, I'm going to write about me winning the lottery and see what happens.
Right, right. And you mentioned Desi's the issue of being Cuban American, which is there's the racism of the era as well. He had to contend with that, and in 1951, dealing with the networks and the sponsors that you mentioned, thought a primetime marriage shouldn't look like, or should look like, even while Arnaz is so creatively in control with Lucy as a team behind the scenes. That's another aspect of the film that is of the film or that is of the time, and yet ahead of the times in a lot of ways, right? Would you agree?
Yeah, I would. Desi, first of all, exhibited a phenomenal business acumen. But he also was an extremely talented man who, as Lucy argues at one point, would have been a movie star if there was such a thing as a Cuban movie star. That he was a very, very good actor. It's when you watch clips of those old episodes, notice Desi. He knows what he's doing. In addition, obviously, to being a great musician. He brought in a man named Carl Freund, who was a feature DP, to design the camera system for I Love Lucy. It became the first multi-camera set. And he designed it in a way, this was very important to Lucy, that Lucy be able to see the audience, the studio audience, and that they be able to see her. Desi also, they badly wanted them to take the show in New York because there was a difference in quality between the original negative and the kinescope that they were going to make from the original negative. And since there are fewer viewers on the West Coast than in the East Coast, let's have the good version be in the East Coast and the poorer version be in the West Coast. Desi said, I don't want there to be a poor version anywhere of this, and came up with a brand new way to do the show, where they would, first of all, be able to shoot the show here in LA, and second, the East would be receiving just as good a piece of work as the West.
Yeah. It's interesting. That's why anybody who kind of knows anything about television, there's sort of that sense of you watch The Honeymooners and you're shocked that it's later than you think it is because it looks rougher. And I Love Lucy is earlier than you think it is because it looks so much better.
That's right.
They're fantastic. Yeah. It's a great moment then to talk, Aaron, about the lead performances of Nicole Kidman and Javier Bardem, who are not doing impersonations as we talked about earlier, but are these full-fledged performances of their own. Talk to us about what maybe those early conversations with Kidman and Bardem were like, because they are both fantastic in it.
Couldn't agree more that they're both fantastic in it. Again, the first thing that I wanted to drill in was I am not looking for a physical or vocal impersonation of I Love Lucy. Play the characters in the script. That we are not going to use any prosthetics or anything like that. That when Lucy and Desi are playing Lucy and Ricky, obviously, we have to nod toward the original. We do more than nod. We have a monitor there with playback, and it is a frame-by-frame recreation of those moments, albeit shards of moments. Listen, when Nicole Kidman, Javier Bardem, J.K. Simmons, and Nina Arianda raise their hands and say that I want to do your movie, your casting search is over. So that was nice. I remember with Javier, who I had only met once before, just for a few moments, when he handed me an Academy Award in 2011. He was presenting my category when I won. Javier immediately exudes Desi's charm, his strength, his brains. He was just kind of a big bear of a guy who wanted to hug you. Very funny, very charismatic, lied in all the right places. Like Javier, any chance you've ever picked up a guitar? Oh, I can play the guitar. You know, any chance even on a table you've ever beat a drum? Oh my God, I've got bongos in my room. I play Babalu all the time. It's actors know if they're ever asked, "Can you ride a horse?" The answer is yes.
Of
You
course,
just never know. Um, so that's how I got those two. You never know. You always know. Listen, when you cast great actors, good things are going to happen. The question mark is always going to be chemistry. What happens when these two get together? Chemistry was fantastic.
Right.
J.K. is an actor who actually was an understudy in my first play, A Few Good Men, on Broadway. And I know that I remember getting a call that he was going on at a Wednesday matinee. And I was living in New York at the time, ran down to the theater because I wanted to see how he did it. He was understudying the role played by Jack Nicholson in the movie. And he was incredible. He was phenomenal. And I went to the producers and I said that when this actor's contract runs out, let's promote J.K. Into the part. And they said, he's a good actor. He just looks like a farmer. And I said, you guys are out of your minds. Just watch his career. And sure enough, 5 minutes later, he wins an Oscar. So I was thrilled to be working with him again. Nina Arianda is a Tony Award-winning actress. I knew her stage work. I knew her film work. Was very excited to get her. And then Tony Hale, Ali Shawkat, and Jake Lacey. Thrilled to get the three of them. So our first table read, which because of COVID was on the roof of a garage. We had, because of the number of people we had to be outside. And because we were outside, it was kind of a windy day and there were a lot of us. So the table configuration, the other side of it was a half a mile away. I just asked everybody to shout the whole movie.
Like filming in a wind tunnel, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, because we finished Chicago 7 at the beginning of COVID, and this whole movie was made during COVID. I'm very grateful to the healthcare professionals who are our COVID crew, who were the reason why we got to work every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk just a little bit more about kind of both of those kind of two sides of the triangle, as it were, those kind of B story and C story structures in the film that are no less important and woven in. Vivian Vance and William Frawley, Fred and Ethel on the show, they add this other perspective, and Nina Arianda and J.K. Simmons are fantastic as well. And you mentioned Vivian Vance's place in the film, because it's interesting because it is this counterbalance to Lucille Ball that brings into focus women's representations then, and certainly reverberates now, and that issue of a sense of that it is not competitiveness between the two of them, but there is also sort of this sense of the forces that be are kind of placing them in this hierarchical structure that
right.
Vivian Vance feels bad about, or feels is chafing against, right? Yeah.
That's right. Well, let me start here. When I wanted Nina Arianda, when I wanted to approach her about the part, I said to our casting director, Francine Maisler, that when you call Nina's agent, be sure and make it clear that I don't think she's right for Ethel Mertz. I think she's right for Vivian Vance. Because you say Ethel Mertz, and there's a kind of frumpy implication. Vivian Vance, in reality, was a very beautiful stage actress herself and dancer, whom Desi and Jess Oppenheimer, they went down to the La Jolla Playhouse down in San Diego. They saw her in a play, and they said, we're going to cast her as Ethel. Lucy, and it's everything is intensified during this week, because this week, I mean, we learn that Lucy's always very hard on everything, very intense about the show, that her standards were very high, and that her hands were in everything. This week, it's 10 times that, because of this notion that she just feels instinctively the best place for her to be is this little Ricardo living room set, and that the show will go away if it's not good. Yeah. So there's friction between Lucy and Vivian, because Lucy will not allow Vivian to lose weight. She will not allow Vivian to wear nice clothes on the show, because as they're having a fight, and as she finally shouts at Vivian, God damn it, Viv, most American women look like you, not me, and they want to see themselves on television. Which is bound to hurt someone's feelings.
Yeah, and that just a dramatic line of look, she dresses frumpy, and she's married to a man who looks like her grandfather.
Right. That Lucy gets to be married to a guy 5 years younger than she is.
Right.
Ethel's married to her grandfather, and the running joke in the show is based on the understanding that she's not good enough for him.
Right. Unbelievable. And which leads so well into another storyline that's so vitally important in the film, which is that of Madeline Pugh, as we talked about, who wrote 125 episodes of the show, all 6 seasons, the only female writer on the show. And she and her co-writer, Bob Carroll, are vital in the creation of Lucy and Desi's vaudeville act, and then which leads to the show. And they are played terrifically by Alicia Shawkat and Jake Lacy, both so great. Talk to us about Madeline Pugh in the film and the way her relationship to Lucille Ball helps define those things for the audience, Aaron, and kind of brings that into focus.
Sure. Well, as you said, Madeline Pugh, it was a trio of writers who wrote every episode of I Love Lucy and wrote every episode to the precursor to I Love Lucy, a radio show called My Favorite Husband, which Lucy starred in opposite a man named Richard Denning. And when CBS said, "Hey, we'd like to take My Favorite Husband from CBS Radio to CBS television," Lucy had an idea for how she could see her husband more. Her husband, who was always on the road with his orchestra or on the boat playing cards or out drinking with the guys, never in the kind of home that she wanted. What if Desi plays my husband on this new iteration of My Favorite Husband? And we'll get to spend time together. So Madeline Pugh was one of those 3 writers, but she's younger than Lucy, and what turns out to be what turns from rather early friction in the show, because Madeline doesn't know why at the table read Monday morning Lucy is really picking on the script in front of everybody, in front of the network executives, in front of the crew and everybody. And, Madeline knows how to return a zinger. And so she does. And that's very unusual that anyone would talk like that to Lucy. And what it really turns out to be, the problem, the friction between the two of them, is that Madeline feels like, for comic effect, Lucy is infantilized from time to time. Whether it's saying wah, or like I said, needing her husband's permission to do something, and Madeline's the one. Madeline says that she's the one in there, in the writer's room, trying to make Lucy smarter, which stuns Lucy in her tracks. What you're saying, Lucy's dumb, and she kind of Lucy gets caught in a generational thing.
And those writers, those meetings, those table reads that we see in the film for the show, and even the writers' room sequences with her and Bob Carroll and Jess Oppenheimer, and the whole film is so much your wheelhouse, Aaron. But let's kind of talk almost specifically about those scenes too, because they're zippy and they're fast, but there's meaning within meaning, and then if the meaning bounces off the wall and it has another meaning, which is so fantastic. Let's sort of kind of riff a little bit on maybe just those scenes and how crafting them was another sort of. They're almost like they're telling mini plays in a way within the film as a whole, right?
Yeah, because what we're seeing in thank you, by the way. Well, what we're seeing in the scenes in the writer's room, in the scene at the table read, and the scenes at rehearsal, is Lucille Ball as chess master being able to see 12 moves ahead. That when they pitch her a story in the writer's room, we go into her head and see that she can see what it's going to look like in the final form. Is the audience going to laugh at this joke? Is this going to make sense? Is this going to work over here? And so we see shards of black and white, shards of Nicole, Javier, JK, and Nina doing I Love Lucy. And yes, it does. The meaning starts to shift. And I hope people find it interesting.
No, absolutely. Though this is a fest focused on writing, Being the Ricardos is your third film, as we mentioned, as a writer and director, Aaron. So I just want to talk about the look and style of the film, as well, because it's so terrifically evocative of an era, and to me sits alongside films like Redford's Quiz Show and Clooney's Good Night and Good Luck in successfully putting us right in that moment and crystallizing the intellectual side of entertainment and what that begets, and the yin and the yang of that. You brought on a top-notch team, including cinematographer Jeff Cronenweth, editor Alan Baumgarten, who also edited Molly's Game and Trial of Chicago 7 for you, production designer John Huttman, who actually did Quiz Show, I believe, right? And the music by Daniel Pemberton, which is characteristically fantastic.
And it's my third time working with Daniel too. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So to wrap up, Aaron, what were some hurdles and unexpected pleasures of of really settling into the world of Being the Ricardos and working with this amazing team here?
I think that if I have a strength as a director, it's knowing what my weaknesses as a director are. And certainly it's one weakness is my lack of visual sensibility. From the beginning, I've always what a movie or an episode of television, for that matter, sounds like. It's not that it's been more important to me than what it looks like. It's just that I've never really been able to make a contribution to what something looks like. With this film, I think I finally had to admit that there may be a visual component to cinema. It's possible. The fact that you compared it visually to Quiz Show or Good Night and Good Luck, a greater compliment I couldn't hear. John Huttman, the production designer, he designed The West Wing, where I thought he did a great job, but the reason I wanted him for this was Quiz Show, where I thought if you can take just the look, that Art Deco look, that 30 Rock look, the look of New York, and transplant it to Hollywood and make an RKO Studios and a ranch in Chatsworth, and the Ciro's nightclub and all these things. And boy, did he hit it out of the park. And then coming up to bat after that, Susan Lyle and her costumes. Again, an area where I can't offer any help. And this is my third time working with Susan, and she knows that I have no wardrobe vocabulary at all. I know the difference between a shirt and a pair of pants, and that's it. With all visual designers, whether production designer, DP, costume designer, anything, they sort of have to hear me speak in a amateurish way, and try to discern what it is that I'm going for. Then they'll give me choices. Do you like this or this? And they'll choose B. It's kind of like getting an eye test. Better or worse? Okay, better. Good, we're getting there. That's how it worked. Jeff Cronenweth. Jeff Cronenweth shot The Social Network. Actually shot most of David Fincher's films, as well as many others, including Hitchcock, the Anthony Hopkins Hitchcock, which again had the look that I was going for. And I have to say, Jeff and his camera operators just killed it every day. I loved what I was seeing on the monitor, but God, then when I got into the editing room and started seeing what it really looked like, I was knocked out, whether it was his lighting, his shot selection, and then, of course, you mentioned Alan Baumgarten, our editor. It's my third time with Alan. Did such a beautiful job and has never stopped trying to make a little improvement. Just an hour ago, I was in the editing room because he wanted to shove just a tiny little thing. An hour ago. Those four people, Susan, Alan, Jeff Cronenweth, and John Huttman. I'll get to Pemberton in a second. Well, I'll throw Pemberton in there. Daniel Pemberton, our composer, from whom I asked for a big, lush Hollywood score. And just as with the actors, I would remind all of them, guys, we are not, except when we're not doing I Love Lucy, okay? The I Love Lucy parts of this are going to be the easiest parts of this, the shot-by-shot recreation. That's tracing paper. We can do that. It's everything else that's hard. So I feel like I can say this without being accused of having a big ego, because I don't feel like I had much to do with this. I think the movie's incredibly handsome. It really looks beautiful. And honestly, my contribution, I would say there was maybe 4 or 5 times all in during the 8-week shoot where I would say to Jeff Cronenwith, we need to do kind of a slow push in right here. Every other time, he would say, "Can I show you what I think we should do?" And he'd tell me what the shot was.
Yeah. Right. And you made and all of that together, and including the editing, as you mentioned, up until an hour ago that he had little ideas. It's a.
By the way, picture is now locked.
Okay. All right.
We locked it in the last hour.
But it has a zippiness to it that sort of moves at the speed of intellect in a lot of ways, of all of these principal characters. That really it's edited is really, it feels so fluid, and it also feels immersive in a lot of ways.
That's great to hear. That's great to hear. You know, if you the audience is a very important component in what you're doing, and I'm very happy that we're starting slowly but surely to get back to audiences. For the last year and a half, almost 2 years now, we've all been watching things by ourselves, in our homes. And I'm grateful that we can do that. But that doesn't compare to the audience experience, that shared experience of people laughing at the same time, silent at the same time, crying at the same time, gasping at the same time. So I'm thinking about the audience experience a lot, and I try to start the movie at 65 miles an hour. If you can get the audience just lean forward a little bit and get their mind working, that they have to catch up, it adds to the thrill of the experience.
Yeah. Well, it certainly does that. It gets your mind working. It gets your heart going. It looks great on top of all of that stuff.
Thanks so much.
So you're so welcome, Aaron. It's been terrific to speak with you here at WGFestival 2021 about Being the Ricardos and all of the ideas in it. It's funny and sharp and takes place on a big canvas, and can be and should be seen on the big screen starting December 10th and on Amazon December 21st. Congratulations again on the film, and thank you so much for joining us at this year's WGFestival.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure as always.
Ladies and gentlemen, Aaron Sorkin. Thanks so much.
You bet.